Good evening. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is June 17th, 2024 in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. And also note that prior to this meeting and afterwards, there's a social for outgoing board members, Gail Nelson and Diane Hansen, and thank you for your service as well. So we'd also like to recognize all those in the audience tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, would you read the school board norms?
Certainly. The board developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to execute all duties of the school board in compliance with North Dakota Century Code, to properly prepare for meetings, and to commit to assessing board effectiveness and ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Diane. Moving on our agenda, we have nothing under public communications. Does the board wish to declare any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? If not, moving on to our consent agenda. Is there a motion? Motion by Steve. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to our regular meeting, we have recognition tonight for our spring sports athletes. And note that our spring sports go well after school is actually out, and for several of our sports, especially when we get into postseason. Jamie, would you read our recognition? And as your name is read, please come up and meet me right over here and then stand on the stage here for a photo. And for the students that aren't able to be here tonight due to other conflicts, we'll make sure they get their item from the board.
The 2024 Spring Sports Recognition for baseball, Tyson Jorson, All-Conference, Thomas Newman, All-Conference All-State, softball, Addison Graves, All-Conference, McKenna Nold, All-Conference All-State, girls track and field, Julia Scari, WDA champ, 100-meter and 300-meter hurdles, state runner-up 300-meter hurdles, and 7th in 100-meter hurdles. Girls soccer, Sarah Sleto, All-Conference All-State, Olivia Sorley, All-Conference All-State, Quinn Billoff, All-Conference, and Lila Becker, All-Conference All-State.
Under correspondence, we received a thank you card for thinking of the family of Gail Nelson and the loss of her mother, and we're sorry to hear about your loss, Gail. Under reports, election report. Christy, would you share that with us?
Yes, we have the unofficial results from the school board election, which was held on June 11th. The results will be final after the county has the canvassing meeting, which will be held on next Monday, the 24th. City 1, Jamie Bear was reelected. Owen McKenna will have City 2, Jacob Meyer, City 4, and Aaron Roberts is Rural 1.
Thank you, Christy. Moving under board education, we have contextual competency, James River Career and Technology Center, improvement, timeline, and review. Mr. Gaylor, please come forward.
Good evening, and thank you to the board and Dr. Leck for inviting me. Just give me a second to get this presentation up and rolling here. It's in classic black and white format. Don't want any distractions. But there's also some pictures in there just to kind of jazz it up a little bit. Dr. Leck had asked me to share a few updates that we have at this point for our JVCTC capital projects. This has been a labor of love for quite a few years now. The original grant application was in the fall of 2021. And then there were some changes from the federal level and what was required in the grant, and we had to revise and rewrite the grant then in December of 2022. There was, at that point, the initial approvals kind of came through, and schools were in various levels of planning stages, and that was about the time that we started to feel some of the impacts of inflationary dollars, really even from the fall of 2021 when we were gathering that information into the winter already of 2022 when some of those changes had been made. And so then in the next legislative session, there was an update to the funding of that and an adjustment from our legislature with inflationary dollars. These are all federal dollars that were flowed through to the state, and the state really prioritized CTE. And I think that it's important to recognize that our legislators put that priority on CTE amongst all the other priorities they were experiencing post-pandemic, because we know that it's a strategy that really works for kids. CTE is really well grounded in what the needs are of our community and our region. Every year we do a comprehensive needs assessment. We study the occupational demands within our region, and then we produce a report on how our kids are doing moving towards those regional outcomes. And so our pathways and our categories have been fairly stable in CTE for the last probably 20 years. And now the national organization has done some juggling of those pathways. So we kind of expect some changes to maybe match how industry is also changing at this time. We use the number 127. You'll see that around the Career Tech Ed Center. And that's a basic ratio that has held true over time. I'm not sure if it will continue to hold true, but for every company, startup, employment opportunity, typically you're going to need one person in an organization with a doctorate or higher, two people with master's or bachelor's degrees, and then 7 who need a technical certification to carry out, whether that's a industry credential provided through a technical institution, or whether that's some kind of certification or credential that's required from within an organization. A lot of companies are developing those sort of on their own now at this point. CTE works for kids because it's learning by doing. They get a chance to experience it. All of our courses have either a simulated work experience or they have a work experience that is off-site as part of their program, so they get a chance to get hands-on with it. Some of our programs have certifications. Kids can walk away now with ASE certification in auto tech, auto collision, CNA, and that's another legislative I guess state health department thing that we're challenging at this point so we can maintain CNA certification. We also hope to have students have a center director certification, which is an option for our child care center once we get that up and rolling. Each of our program areas also has leadership opportunities, things like FFA, Skills USA, those are what they call CTSOs. And then each program is also really strong, I believe, because they have people from our community that come together and sit on an advisory team, and they say, does what you're doing currently match what's actually happening in industry? Is your equipment up to date with what students need to train on for industry? And some of you, I think, have been involved in those advisories. So I mentioned that on the beginning because for CTE programs to have that high level of quality, facilities and quality facilities are very important. The legislature saw that importance, and so they prioritized some dollars through what they call the Capital Projects Grant to be able to fund that. So these are the kind of the pathways that we want to support and are continuing to support as long as we have staffing to support those. If you've been through the CTC or you want to go through the CTC, give me a call, give Heidi Eckert a call. We'll be glad to host you. These are the programs that we currently have, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but just enough to say each of these programs have very sustainable enrollment, and each of these programs have an important place in our community and region. And so as part of developing this grant, we had to go through that comprehensive needs assessment, and we had to figure out what are our priorities now, but also into the future, and how do we make sure that we have a facility footprint that can take us, from where we are now to maybe where we want to go in the future, and to be flexible and adaptable, because when we wrote this grant, we didn't anticipate that some of these categories could change at the federal level, or they're going to be rebranded, or there are new things that are taking shape in industry that will influence the types of equipment and facilities that might be needed. So I just bring that up and show you some of these pictures and things that our students do on a daily basis, because I want you to be thinking about any of this space at CTC needs to be flexible and adaptable. And it also needs to be sustainable. Every time we add a square foot, we also increase our energy bills. We increase the amount of cleaning that needs to happen. And so we were very mindful when we wrote this application. There were some schools that were already building, Dickinson, Grand Forks. They were already building, adding on to their facilities, and they had a plan to expand anyway. And so some of their grants were much larger. But the state also saw priority in these regional applications where we felt like we were right-sized, but we also wanted to be able to add and expand as a CTC. So we did that comprehensive needs assessment, and we came up with a set of priorities. And those priorities at the time were to enhance health career opportunities, to create pathways for tech and engineering, to enhance our future ag needs and our current ag needs, to restore a pathway for information technology, and to increase opportunities for work-based learning. So work-based learning can be off-site, could be out in the community, and I think you heard from Mr. Wagon previously about what those work-based learning opportunities look like. But it also can be simulated and within the school environment, much like building trades, for example. So at the time that we originally envisioned that building trades expansion, we were looking at about a 7,000 square foot space, and that 7,000 square foot space was going to be building trades and some other potential program. At this point, the original program that we had in the health careers area isn't something that we plan to move forward with. And so that entire space opens up new opportunities for CTC, and it also opens up new opportunities about how we can think about where that building trades expansion would be structured. So to be able to facilitate a conversation like that, we have to have conversations about site plans and square footage, and how do you build a flexible enough space that it could be adaptable to whatever programs are needed in the future. And we started to have some preliminary discussions with an architect, and realized that the fee structure for something like this was going to require bidding. And so Christy has helped a ton with getting that information advertised out, and we've been collecting RFQs for architects for the building trades expansion is what we're calling it. So this graphic, it's really difficult to see, but there are actually a couple of site locations that we've looked at just initially. We haven't had a lot of internal discussion. Needs to be kind of a site plan developed. But originally our thought was to include this expansion to the south of the current CTC structure, specifically south of building trades, if you know where that is. And our goals with that space were that we could have our students working on their cabin projects or small house projects out of the elements. It creates an element of safety, but it also has been a scheduling constraint for us because a lot of times it wasn't light enough for them to start right away at 8 in the morning. Think deep winter. You don't have to think about it that much right now, but you remember the days not too long ago going to work in the dark and coming home in the dark. Anyway, we also have a need to either replace or renovate our current greenhouse. And so you could do that a couple different ways. There are much different price points for that. Whether you're locating it as a standalone structure or next to another structure, taking advantage of some of the electrical or heat sources of another structure, or just replacing the current space. We want to expand that, but also to be able to have a space where it's handicap accessible. So as we started to think about that expansion, we wanted it to be multi-use space, so flexible enough that we can adapt it to whatever it might need to be in the future, to be able to be right-sized in our design to make it sustainable. And where we could, we wanted to have in-kind contributions to the grant through the use of our students. They get a great opportunity. So construction tech, they can build out the inside of a shell of a building with steel stud construction, and that helps us save some dollars in that, but it also creates a work-based learning opportunity for them at the same time. There were a couple things that we needed to address with access and equity for our special populations, specifically in the greenhouse that hasn't been fully accessible. And then we had talked at the time about community partnerships to sustain the community needs. So as we think about what those future opportunities are, at the time we wrote the grant, we were thinking that any additional space that might be available might be a health careers expansion, but we also wrote and have flexibility to add egg processing or precision agriculture, energy education, STEM or robotics. CDL is something that actually has pretty high demand amongst our students and across the state. And then currently there are a couple of CTE centers that are working on a heavy equipment module. It's fairly expensive if you think about it, but sharing those resources in maybe rotating labs across the state could be something. So CTE is really shifting their mindset. Hands-on is where the biggest bang for the buck is, but if we can have a hybrid class and have mobile lab units that travel around, that's also something that helps benefit a lot of kids in those high-cost kind of items like heavy equipment would be. But I think we should go for CDL. We need our own truck up there. That's Plus, we would have bus driver training opportunities then too, yeah. One of the other pieces, so there were a few pieces in there, one of the other pieces was a commercial kitchen facility. This would be having an inspectable commercial grade kitchen facility. And the original design for that, what was originally discussed, was that commercial kitchen would be located in some existing space within the transition house. As we looked at that space and needed to expand for things like freezers and refrigerators, it was going to take space away from another part. And the transition house appreciates the opportunity for a commercial kitchen, but maybe didn't appreciate losing some of that space as much. So we started already to think about that idea a little bit differently. Fast forward a year and a half, and the Art Center started to have discussions about their space. And this is an idea that I think is an important concept to discuss. Where there are partnerships that are logical and sustainable, I think that it's in our best interest to do the best things that we can do for our full community. And a commercial kitchen is something that we would use. We feel like a sustainable class structure for that might be 1, maybe 2 blocks of a day, where students would come in and you would find somebody, a local chef, or someone with the right credentialing to be able to teach students for a block a day. Maybe in the slower part of their day, say the 8 to 10 format is something that is sustainable in other communities. Wapaton is the first example that I can think of, where it's a local chef. They can come in, teach culinary arts to our students. Other schools have shifted that into an egg processing lab. You see the potential for people from the community to be able to come in and access it. And the Arts Center expansion also included a goal of having a commercial kitchen facility that's accessible for their teaching and learning purposes. And so it made some sense to work together on that concept. What's in this graphic is just the space that's available as they acquired the property next to them. That additional space, some of it was already fairly well set up electrically and with plumbing to be able to, a portion of it was able to do that, to accommodate something like this. And so we've had quite a few discussions about that. Later in the board agenda, you'll have an opportunity to look at a memorandum of understanding that would enable us to continue to have that dialogue. And I feel like this is an adequate space. I feel like it's in our downtown footprint, and I feel like it's an opportunity for our students. One constraint that we would have to consider is that we would now, potentially need to transport students. We have other classes that require students to, leave campus. Living sports would be something like that, or even building trades from time to time when they're offsite on projects. There's that requirement as well. But I think that it's a concept we need to explore and at least consider, that we'd be a lot more efficient with our resources, and we do a community good when we approach it in that way. And I'll be happy to answer any questions others have at the end here. Our greenhouse needs replacement. There are useful lifespans of any structure, but a greenhouse particularly, if there's any shifting with the foundation or footings, you start to see cracking in the glass. And then the other reason that we prioritized that originally was that it isn't fully accessible for all students. And we've kind of outgrown our, no pun intended, outgrown our space there as to, we'd like to expand that a little bit so that it's adequate for our students. Other items that are included in the budget, a few months ago you voted on the child care renovation. Part of that renovation, we were able to get dollars shifted within this project to be able to support part of that renovation. Updates, I didn't include an update on that because I think that you're aware of that, but we did get bids, and that's later on this board agenda, and thanks again to everybody for supporting that process. But that is on track. Aviation equipment, tech and engineering lab equipment. We haven't been able to start a tech and engineering program yet. If you know of any people who are have credentials in that area, we'd be highly interested in looking at either part-time or potential shifts to support tech and engineering. It's something that came up in our last vision visit. At that time, we had a strong tech and engineering program at the middle school. That's since shifted to a STEM program. And if you have that feeder level, you really should have a program at the high school as well. We currently have robotics, which really supports a lot of our students that have an interest in that. And then we have IT as well as our business classes that are supportive of that. But it's an aspiration we have. Energy education equipment, that could be an area. CDL. We did purchase a trailer that we're able to move equipment around. So sometimes, if you're not aware, we have a consortium of schools, our member schools, but then we also have a consortium that's involved in Carl Perkins dollars. And so we share resources with Medina and Pingree through that as well. So if we needed to transport some of our equipment, let's say that Medina Ag wanted to do a welding unit, it's possible now for us to be able to put that in a trailer and take that down the road. We also purchased that big enough so that it could be something like, you've probably maybe read of like mobile meats labs or tire changing labs and those things that travel around the state as well. And then we've already been able, through some support from Ann Carlson, to cross some items off this list, like those hospital beds, and reaching a little bit closer to the industry standard on those. So overall, we have a list of projects, and each of those projects have an allocated amount penciled in. As you understand, with working with construction projects, if I were to, publicly announce all of the exact amounts that are budgeted in those categories, we would see bids that come in exactly at those budgeted amounts. And so we have over $1.9 million that's assembled for this, for all of these projects. And you can see some of those funding sources listed in there. So we had our original state matching grant of about $800,000. And then we had the local match sources, so that's another $800,000 that made up those contributions. And then we had the inflationary impact adjustment. So these were dollars, again, federal dollars that the legislators prioritized for inflationary impact. So that's another $240,000. Then they were able to expand that even more to address more of the inflationary impact and add another $60,000. And then recently, our RWIP child care grant also doesn't directly impact the original budget for capital projects, but it impacts the facility footprint at JVCTC pretty significantly. So our next steps, we just got the bids in for child care renovation. If those bids are considered and accepted by the board tonight, then we'd be able to start scheduling that construction. Our RFQ for architecture, so our request for qualifications for architects, and we've had a high amount of interest. Christy, I would say about 11 is what I think I counted, people who were interested enough to seek out information, and we expect to have pretty competitive process for that. And we'd be looking at starting spring 25 construction of our building trades expansion and the greenhouse portion. Whether the greenhouse portion is something we need an architect for or not is still something to determine, but we want to engage with an architect on the site, overall site plan and planning for the future at CTC to make sure that where we locate something isn't something we regret in the future or something that costs us a lot of money because of where we located it. So we just want somebody to review that to be able to provide us with the best guidance they can. Our goal would be substantial completion of the building trades expansion by August of 2025. That's a fairly realistic timeline from what I've understand of the process, because we're planning to use mostly pre-engineered for that structure. So then the final phase, once the major parts of the project are completed, we'd be able to allocate for the equipment purchases. We want to leave that till last, not because it's unimportant, and each category will certainly get their focus and priority amount, but we wanted to leave that because unexpected things come up in construction, and we didn't want to be faced with unexpected consequence to anything. So that's the 20-minute update that Rob asked me to give in 10 minutes, but no, I'm just kidding. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
And Mr.
Thank you.
Gaylor, I never go long when I say 10 minutes. So.
Right. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylor. Melissa, go ahead.
I actually have 3 questions for you. I don't know if you want me to ask them all at once or just one at a time.
Yeah.
I was thinking in the original plan, there was a planned ambulance bay, and they were going to be also doing some EMT training there. Is that now, and they were going to be kind of partnering with us to help us make that happen? Is that off the table now?
You're correct that
Okay.
that was in the original plan, and it's no longer in the
Okay,
plan. Yep.
okay.
There was
Second-
just a lack of interest in the partnership.
Okay,
You know,
Yep. Some of those
the
things
best
are,
of intentions, I
yeah.
think, by all sides, and just the practicality of it was just not able to come to fruition.
okay. Second question, if we move the kitchen space and partner with the art center, what will happen with that space then at the transition house that was originally planned for that? Because that's a significant space.
Yeah, so
Here.
Depending on how the budget goes with the overall capital projects, our intent was to be able to provide a cafe-like experience for Transition House, for them to sell anything commercially or to be able to produce food or cater food in any commercial way. It has to be a commercially inspectable kitchen. Their interest is more along the customer service and coffee sales. So we still feel like a cafe is the best fit for that. We might be able to add some dollars for egg processing. If you've been to the CTC and you've looked at our egg processing lab, we have some stainless steel equipment, oven, freezer, that sort of thing. But the space is really small, and it's sort of hard to instruct from. So we feel like that space at Transition House could be maybe multi-use for that, and it wouldn't impact the other space that they were concerned about losing.
Okay.
So same idea, smaller idea, though.
Okay.
Yep.
So they would still be able to utilize that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, currently Amy likes the storage, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And then my last question is, I know several years ago, I believe we had an aviation flight simulator, Big Bay. What, could you kind of give
So
us a follow-up
amongst,
on that?
amongst the priorities that we have, we still have aviation equipment as a fairly high priority. I mean, it's a fairly high dollar amount. I don't know that that dollar amount can quite reach the full motion aviation simulator we envisioned, but we're always on the search for grants. And if you know our instructor, Brad Stanglin, or our drone support person, Sid Mann, they're always on the lookout for grants, and they're emailing about those. So I wouldn't count that out of the running yet, but definitely a high dollar amount prioritized towards aviation equipment. Just may not be the, excuse me, full motion simulator.
Yep, go ahead, Melissa. Yeah.
I was thinking originally that we already had the funds, or it was something that
do
was
have-
donated for.
We do have
for that.
aviation simulators. We have
Okay.
2 of them that you can log actual flight hours on. And then we have 8 of them that are more just everyday use kind of things. Excuse me. Yeah, it's a really tough topic. Oh, thanks, Jason.
Any other questions? Dan?
I wanted to follow up on the aviation question. I wondered how the program's going. I know it's just 2 years old, and you have plans as you expand to take that into the new building or the new expansion and have room for it. Are you having the interest in it? Have you had any problems keeping instructors? Just a general update on that program.
No, we've been able to have the same instructor, and he is returning next year. Brad Stanglin will be the instructor for that. The space itself moved just on the hall because Mrs. Eckert anticipated the construction coming, and so we moved them into what was Innovation Academy. Prior to that, it was the adult learning area of the facility, which is right on the far northeast corner. So that's all moved in there. It's actually a bigger space, and they were liking that. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. The aviation program, the most sustainable part of that has been to be able to run Aviation 1 and 2 1 year, and then drones or UAS 1 and 2 in the opposite year. And they've had pretty sustainable enrollment. This year they actually had to cap that enrollment because they only have so many stations for that Aviation 1 and 2. I think this year they finished with about 14 students in that, and I don't know what the numbers for drones are next year, but I know there was high interest enough to continue the program.
Any other questions from the board? Aaron?
Yeah, so there's just a lot of moving parts on the sourcing side, funding side, and then just with the scope of the different projects. And things have to adapt and change as you learn new things and stuff. So I think it'd be good to have transparency on when things change as they mature, and we get obviously closer to implementation here on some of these, and having one project possibly impact how we do another project. If we could have some regular updates and transparency on that, I think that'd be helpful, so that you see one element come to the board for approval, like with the bid that's coming up, how that may or may not affect something else within the scope of the overall improvement, the $2 million or $2.4 million here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Thank you. And
We could either do a separate CTE project report, on a regular basis or on an as needed, or I can include it as part of my superintendent report. We'll look to either one of those venues to try to
Yeah, I
connect
think
with
that'd
the
be
board.
good, because like I say, there's just so many different aspects to this, and it's trying to keep it all together and understanding the overall context.
Sure.
So either way. It doesn't-
Yeah, and Mr. Gaylor did a good job in outlining this, but we've had multiple years. Normally you don't have a project that extends like this, but as Mr. Gaylor shared, we had an initial grant that was delayed because of federal delays. And when that funding was going to come in, which delayed projects, which meant the state had to replace those funds. Then the state had inflationary costs. Then we added the RWIP grant. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening between initial ideas and to where we're at right now. So I absolutely think there's a need to make sure that we're providing some level of reporting on where we're at and what the impacts are.
and
I would say that I think it worked out best for our students because we've received fairly competitive bids for the projects we've seen recently, and some of the schools that were at a spot where they just had to go with what they had at the time aren't doing as much for their students because of the timing of that.
And you're referring to construction costs
Yes,
stabilizing.
specifically that,
Yeah, yeah.
Jason?
On the actual programming side of things, you mentioned like Dickinson and several other schools have been expanding. That in terms of specific programming we will offer, are we on par with those other, and I know you're not an expert on each center, but I guess I'm thinking about the programming. Are we catching up? Are we going to be ahead? Are we, like aviation, for example? I mean, off the top of my head, first thing that comes to my mind is, a partnership with UND or whatever, working through that. But how would you, when this is all done and we've implemented some of these new programs and made space and all that, do you feel we're on par with other centers in the state?
I would say that we're right-sized for the region and the number of schools that we are serving. So Dickinson or Williston, Dickinson was its own. They had an in-high school kind of program, and then there's a more center approach to their vision now. As far as aviation specifically, I think Minot and Bismarck are the only other 2 schools that are able to offer that. So we've been able to, again, at the right size that we need, just that 1 block of students, and every other years with drones. I think those are the creative solutions to get kids the opportunities that are represented in maybe other parts of the state. As we look at CTE in general, there are some gap areas in the state. So if you think of maybe north and northwest of here, there are some schools that aren't part of centers, and then also north of Bismarck, and then further way south of Bismarck as well, there's some schools that, so I think that there's, if there's any appetite in the legislature to continue this concept of expanding capital projects, that we should be thinking maybe about engaging people in conversations around a satellite site. So rather than, assuming that students from 80 to 90 miles away would be interested in being a part of our center and having to come to this facility footprint, are there facility footprints that we could have in other communities that help spread CTE across the state? Because that's really what we want for kids, is more CTE opportunities. Then, if those centers are sort of joined together or have collaborations, there's some efficiency in that, but then there's also an opportunity to share resources, share instructors potentially. That's where I think we could definitely expand or see some other programs offered, is if we were a little bit more nimble and creative in our scheduling, and if we had another set of schools to partner with for the instructors that they have as well.
Any other questions from the board? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Gaylor. Good
Yes.
timing for your presentation for us today, and we look forward to future information, including what's on our agenda, but what's happening next. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yep.
Moving on our agenda, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Leck.
Thank you. You have my written report. I'll run through that as well. School board onboarding, as a reminder, I sent out a survey at least last meeting, maybe it was 2 meetings ago. But if you haven't had a chance to look at that survey, I ask that you do. In Jamestown Public Schools, we are on the high end of school boards across the state of North Dakota for what the amount of commitment that we put in and resource we put in towards onboarding. It's from this board, it has been a big priority, and I think it needs to be, and so thank you for that. But we want to make sure that our onboarding process is the best that it can be. We will have new board members coming in this summer, so we want to make sure that the experience they have provides them the support that they need to fulfill these responsibilities as quickly as they can, feel comfortable that we get them there. So the survey, even though we feel like we've done a lot of work towards onboarding and we commit a lot of time, we want to make sure it's the right time, and we want to make sure that our mentoring experiences do support our new board members. So if you have some time, please take just a handful of questions related to mentoring and onboarding. We just want to make sure that we're aligning that curriculum the best that we can for our new board members. The retreat has been scheduled, the board retreat has been scheduled for a week from today. We'll have 2 topics. One is goal setting around board self-assessment. We had approval for that a few months ago. It was also included in Board Memo 105. My analysis of that, but we also felt it was important that the board engages in that, in reviewing that data. So you will have access to that that raw data, that full data set, as well as Board Memo 105. So I would encourage you to look at both of those prior to coming here for the board meeting or the board retreat next Monday, just so you're able. We want to be as efficient as we can in our board retreats, because as everybody here has been through board retreats, and they get lengthy, and we want to make sure that we are efficient with our time. So please come prepared for that. I'll facilitate some small group activities, and then you'll build towards some recommended actions. So That is the self-assessment as it relates to facility, or as it relates to facilities. The board in November had a retreat talking about options you engaged in a few different activities related to the Enrollment and Facilities Task Force and their recommendations and findings. You gave us some direction in central office to say, we want you to explore the elementary options. That's where you had directed our focus. So we came up with 4 different options for you to consider. And then we looked through a 10-year analysis of many different variables that include school finance, taxation, facility upkeep and maintenance, enrollment, personnel, and then the key takeaways from all of this. So we had a pretty broad look at the impacts of each of those 4 options. So I have a presentation that I've created that gives you, we aren't going to walk through each variable, and the Facilities Committee and Finance Committee has already done that, and they've spent some time analyzing that, those documents already. We're going to give the board the key takeaways version of that presentation. And so we are going to look at historical and projected enrollments. There's some key enrollment trigger points that, as we did that analysis over the next 10 years, that really stuck out to us. And so we'll talk about those and then how that impacts the needs of the district. Creative management of funding sources used in recent years. So how have we used our ESSER funds? How have we used other efficiencies to help to clip the peak of our facility needs, and what facility needs continue to exist, even though we've devoted a great deal of resources to our facilities already. And I think we've done a really nice job in managing those funds, but there's still more to be done. An explanation of those options that the board has directed us at central office to examine, and then a 10-year outlook, like I said, for each of those options. So we'll have a lot to kind of pack into that 30-minute presentation, and then I'll facilitate some small group discussions and building towards consensus and next steps for the board in that board retreat. The next item that I have is a draft of committee assignments. As the board is well aware, I don't make the committee assignments for the board, but I do give you a draft that's based on a few different parameters. We want to make sure that there's balance of workloads between board members, that we don't have all of the committees on 3 or 4 board members, that those things are spread out and that the workload is commensurate, that we have some level of consistency in our committees to make sure that we can leverage the work that's been done in the past. And so I have a draft of committee assignments. I would ask you to look through those and provide feedback to the board president on if there are committees that you say, boy, I think I really enjoy working on this committee, I'd like to continue, or I've really always wanted to be on this committee or that committee. And so I've just given you a draft that in July you'll want to have further action on, and maybe in between there some discussion. You already did look at approve the support staff schedule revision, and I outlined that we're really looking for a little bit of consistency and equity, addressing some inequities in our summer work schedule. So we made some shifts there, and the Finance Committee looked through that and appreciate those changes, and the bid acceptance will come later. Happy to talk about those at that time. And the last thing I have is the students, or the Spotlight, Jamestown Public Schools Spotlight. So our theater arts summer program is hosting or presenting Anastasia the Musical about a week and a half from today. If you've never had the pleasure of being in the audience and watching the summer musicals, they're always amazing. They do such a nice job. The students and the adults that help and support that, and it is Mrs. McIntyre's final performance. So a nice opportunity to honor her work as well. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Any questions from the board? Any questions? Okay, thank you. And yes, and as far as the committee assignments, they're they're not a lifetime assignment. They're 1 year, so, but so far. But if you have questions on them, or if you would like to be considered for another one either this year or next year, just please let us know. Any other questions? Or okay. If not, moving on in our agenda, nothing under old business. Under new business, we have nothing under activities, buildings and grounds, curriculum, assessment, instruction. Under finance, we have A and B, general fund balance and monthly financials for your information. If you have questions for Christy, we can answer those. Letter C, approval to accept bids for JV-CTC expansion. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion and a second for approval to accept bids for JV-CTC expansion. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call, oh, Jason, did you have a question? No? Okay. If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. D, approval of the 2024 to 2025 gymnastics agreement. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Jamie. You have a motion and a second for approval of the 2024 to 2025 gymnastics agreement. Any discussion? Any discussion? And I noticed it was a 2-year agreement for that. If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Nothing under 5 personnel or 6 policies and procedures. Number 7, tuition A, approval of a tuition agreement for an 11th grade student to attend Pingree Buchanan. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second for approval of a tuition agreement for an 11th grade student to attend Pingree Buchanan. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. 8 other. A, approval of a memorandum of understanding between James Valley Career and Technology Center and Jamestown Arts Center to support culinary arts. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second for approval of a memorandum of understanding between James Valley Career and Technology Center and Jamestown Arts Center to support culinary arts. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Items for future agenda. Any items for future agenda from the board? If not, if you have an item for future agenda, please let Dr. Leck or myself know. Meetings to be scheduled. We have a Health Insurance Committee meeting on Monday, June 24th, 2024 at 12 p.m. in the District Office Conference Room. A school board retreat on Monday, June 24th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in the District Office Conference Room. And food will be provided for that. Yep, we'll have supper, a working supper, and wear comfy clothes because we'll be there a little while. So, so that is on Monday. And a school board meeting on Monday, July 15th, 2024 at 5:15, the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. And I'm sure at some point following that, we'll have a finance and a facilities meeting too. Those aren't quite scheduled yet. So for your monthly superintendent evaluation, remember to complete Section 5, Community Relations, and Section 6, Operations and Resource Management. Reminder of the outgoing board member social following this meeting here there's some cake in the back with some really pretty frosting. So, and so please stay to join us for that. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.